It was as if there was a neon sign above his head flashing "Golden Child," and no one ever questioned it. Tyler was a year older than me, so for most of our childhood, he used his age as an excuse to take whatever he wanted. Toys disappeared, clothes were claimed, and even money I saved from mowing lawns vanished if I wasn't paying attention. He had this arrogant, entitled attitude, like the world owed him everything. Meanwhile, I was the scapegoat, the invisible kid who always got blamed when Tyler messed up. I remember one particular memory, burned into my mind like a scar. I was 10 years old and had saved for 3 months to buy the best RC car on the market. It was sleek, painted bright red, with working headlights and wheels that could make it zoom over sidewalks and grass like it was built for speed. I can still remember how proud I felt walking out of the toy store holding that box like it was treasure. It truly was to me. Tyler, of course, zoned in on it the second I brought it home. He was 11, old enough to understand the value of respecting other people's things, but that didn't matter. "Let me try it," he whined, practically shaking with impatience. "Not yet," I said, shaking my head. "I just got it. Let me enjoy it first." "You're so selfish," he retorted. "What's the point of having it if you don't share?" Looking back, I wish I had stood firm, but back then, I wanted my parents to see me as the good kid, the one who shared and didn't make waves. So like a fool, I handed him the remote. "Be careful," I warned, already feeling the knot of regret. Tyler didn't even pretend to listen. Within minutes, the car was flying down the driveway with him laughing wildly as he jerked the wheel sharply. Before I could stop him, the car slammed into the curb with a loud crack, followed by silence. I ran over, praying that it wasn't as bad as it sounded. It was worse. The front wheel had snapped off, and the body was scratched all over. My brand-new treasure was ruined. Tyler laughed. He actually laughed. "Whoops," he said, grinning like it was the funniest thing in the world. I ran inside, tears streaming down my face, clutching the broken car in my arms. "Mom, Tyler broke it," I cried. "I told him to be careful, and he—" My mom didn't even look up from the magazine she was reading. "Nathan, boys will be boys," she said. "You can't expect him to be careful at his age." I shouted, desperate for her to take my side. "He's almost 12. "Enough," she snapped. "Stop overreacting. It's just a toy." That was the moment I realized. Tyler could do whatever he wanted, and I would always be the one told to let it go. By the time we entered our teenage years, things only got worse. Tyler didn't just take my toys anymore. Now, he took my clothes, my bike, and any money I managed to earn from odd jobs. I remember when he borrowed my bike to ride to school. It was my pride and joy. A shiny blue Schwinn I'd bought secondhand after mowing a dozen lawns over the summer. Tyler never returned it. When I finally found it 3 days later, it was dumped in a ditch, soaked and rusted from being left out in the rain. "Why didn't you just take care of it?" I yelled at him when I found him lounging on the couch, unfazed. Tyler shrugged, barely looking up from the TV. "I forgot where I parked it. Chill out." When I tried to complain to my parents, my mom just sighed like it was my fault. "Nathan, you need to learn how to share. He's your brother." "Share?" I wanted to scream. How was I supposed to share something when he didn't care enough to respect it? The double standard in our house was impossible to ignore. When Tyler broke something, it was just a mistake. But when I asked for gas money to get to school or supplies for a project, it was, "You need to learn the value of money, Nathan." Life doesn't give handouts. I was the one shoveling driveways, babysitting, and mowing lawns while Tyler coasted through life, wrecking everything in his path. And wreck it all, he did. Tyler got his first car at 16, a beat-up old Dodge Neon our dad, Robert, bought for him. He didn't even make it 6 months before he crashed it into a telephone pole, trying to drift in the snow. Did he face any consequences? Number. My parents scraped together the money to buy him a replacement. Another junker, this time a Pontiac, which he wrecked within the year. He's young, my mom said, when I asked why they kept rewarding his recklessness. He'll learn. I wanted to scream, "What about me? When was I going to get a car? Or was I supposed to keep walking to school in the Ohio winters because I wasn't born with Tyler's golden boy halo?" The tipping point came when I turned 18. By then, I'd had enough of the excuses, the favoritism, and the blame. It all started with my laptop. It was the only thing I'd managed to save for that I truly needed. I used it for schoolwork and applying to colleges. One night, I found it shattered, screen cracked, keyboard smashed, completely useless. "Tyler!" I shouted, storming into his room. "What did you do to my laptop?" He didn't even look guilty. "I borrowed it and dropped it." "Chill out. You shouldn't have left it where I could get it." I saw red. That was it. I wasn't going to let him destroy one more thing I worked for. That night, I called Uncle Hank, my mom's older brother. Uncle Hank was a retired cop, tough as nails, and didn't put up with excuses. He'd always been the only adult in my life who truly saw Tyler for who he was. "Pack your bags," he told me after I explained everything. "You're coming to stay with me." It was the first time in my life I felt like someone had my back. Uncle Hank didn't just offer me a place to stay, he gave me something I'd never had before: independence. He handed me the keys to his old 1993 Chevy Silverado. "She's seen better days," he said, as I stared at the truck in awe. "But she's reliable. Take care of her, Nathan, and she'll take care of you." That truck wasn't just a vehicle to me, it was freedom. For the first time, I had something that was truly mine. And I swore to myself that no one, not Tyler, not my parents, would take it from me. Moving in with Uncle Hank felt like stepping into a whole new world. His house, in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Toledo, Ohio, wasn't fancy, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd ever lived. Hank was direct and fair, treating me like an adult, something my parents never did. The first morning after I moved in, I found Hank at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. He looked up as I walked in, still in my pajamas, and nodded toward the stove. "I made extra if you're hungry. And Nathan, you're going to start pulling your weight around here, all right?" I froze for a second, worried this was about to turn into one of those "you're lucky I'm helping you" lectures my parents always gave me. But Hank continued, "I'll show you how to take care of the truck later. Oil changes, brakes, the works. Owning a truck means knowing how to keep her running." That was it. No lectures, no guilt trips, just Hank teaching me responsibility in a way that didn't feel like punishment. It was a relief. The Chevy Silverado was parked in Hank's driveway. Big, solid, a bit of a beast with a dull green paint job that had seen better days. The bumper was crooked, and the interior smelled faintly of gasoline and coffee. But I didn't care. It was mine. The first time I climbed behind the wheel, Hank leaned against the passenger side window and grinned. "Drive her slow for now, kid," he said. "She's sturdy, but she's not invincible. Take care of her, and she'll get you where you need to go." I promised I would. For the first time in my life, I felt free. That truck was my key to independence. I used it to get to my new job at a local hardware store, where I stocked shelves and helped customers haul lumber and tools to their cars. The Silverado quickly became more than just a mode of transportation. It became a tool itself. I started taking on side jobs, helping people move, hauling junk to the dump, even picking up furniture deliveries for neighbors. Every dollar I earned felt like a victory, proof that I didn't need my parents or anyone else to bail me out. But, of course, Tyler couldn't stand that. The first time I drove the Silverado over to my parents' house, it only took Tyler about 10 seconds to start whining. "Where'd you get the truck?" he asked, narrowing his eyes as he stood on the driveway with his arms crossed. "Uncle Hank gave it to me," I said, walking past him and ignoring the look on his face. "You didn't even pay for it," he sneered. "Must be nice to get handouts." That was rich, coming from Tyler. I turned to face him, my voice calm. "It's not a handout. Hank gave me the truck because I take care of it, and I earn my own way. You wouldn't understand." Tyler's face turned red, but before he could snap back, Mom stepped outside, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What's going on out here?" "Nothing," I muttered, shaking my head. Tyler, of course, had to start his usual whining. "It's not fair. Mom, Nathan gets a truck, and I don't have anything." "You wrecked 3 cars," I shot back. "Maybe if you took care of your stuff, you'd still have one." "Enough." Mom's voice cut between us like a knife. "Nathan, you don't need to rub it in. Tyler, stop acting like a child." But that was the thing. Tyler was a child, at least mentally, and my parents never made him grow up. A few months later, Tyler totaled his 3rd car, an old Pontiac Grand M my dad had bought him after he wrecked the last one. Tyler was driving too fast on a rainy day and smashed straight into a street pole. I wasn't surprised when I heard about it, but I was furious when Mom called me later that week. "Nathan," she said, trying to sound casual but failing, "your brother is in a bit of a bind. He doesn't have a car now, and it's hard for him to get to work." I knew where this was going. "What does that have to do with me?" There was a long pause before she finally said it. "You have the truck, and you don't use it all the time. Maybe you could let him borrow it until he gets back on his feet." "No," I said immediately. "Nathan," she said, as if I'd just insulted her, "you're being selfish. Your brother really needs this. Family helps family." "No," I repeated, firmer this time. "Tyler wrecked 3 cars, Mom. I'm not letting him touch my truck. It's how I get to work. I rely on it." She tried the guilt trip next. "You can take the bus for a few days. It's not like you have far to go." "Not happening," I said, and hung up. For the next week, I got the cold shoulder from both my parents. Every time I stopped by their house to grab something, Mom would mutter under her breath about how I was being unreasonable. Meanwhile, Tyler just sulked and avoided me like I had done something terrible, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let him ruin the one thing I had that I could actually depend on. I knew Tyler. He didn't hear the word no the same way everyone else did. To Tyler, no was just a challenge to find a way to get what he wanted. Sure enough, just a few days later, he did exactly that. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished a long shift at the hardware store. I walked into the parking lot, heading toward where I usually parked the Silverado, far enough away from other cars to avoid door dings. But as I got closer, something felt wrong. The truck wasn't there. At first I thought I might just be tired and had parked it somewhere else. But after walking the entire lot twice, the reality hit me like a heavy stone in my stomach. It was Tyler. I pulled out my phone, calling him, my hands shaking with rage. He picked up after a few rings, his voice annoyingly casual. "Hey, bro, what's up?" "Where's my truck?" I demanded. "Oh, relax," he replied, as if it were no big deal. "I just borrowed it for a bit. I'll bring it back soon." "You stole my truck," I snapped. "Bring it back now, or I'll call the cops." "You're overreacting," Tyler said dismissively. "It's just a truck. Chill out." He hung up before I could respond. My blood was boiling under my skin. I had no idea how he'd even gotten into the truck. I always kept the keys with me. But then it occurred to me, months ago, I had read something online about certain Chevy Silverado models having keys that could be easily copied if you had the VIN number. Tyler must have gone through the trouble of getting a spare key just to steal my truck. I stood there, pacing and fuming, until finally, about half an hour later, Tyler pulled into the lot. The truck was covered in mud. Fast food wrappers were scattered across the passenger seat, and the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered in the air. Tyler climbed out, wearing that smug grin he always had, and tossed me the keys. "See? No harm done," he said. I lost it. "What the hell is wrong with you, Tyler? You stole my truck, trashed it, and you think this is funny?" "Relax," he shrugged. "It's just a truck." To him, it might have been just a truck, but to me, it was my lifeline, and I wasn't going to let him destroy it. After Tyler handed me the keys, his smug expression still plastered on his face, I couldn't even speak. I wanted to scream, punch something, or throw him into the mud that had splattered all over my truck to see if he'd still think it was funny. Instead, I climbed into the Silverado, slammed the door harder than necessary, and just sat there gripping the wheel, trying to calm down. Inside, the truck was a wreck. Fast food wrappers filled the cup holders, soda stains marred the fabric seats, and the cigarette smell was thick enough to make me gag. I knew Tyler didn't smoke, so he must have picked up one of his low-life friends and let them trash the cabin. It felt like a violation. This wasn't just some old beater. This truck was mine, the one thing I could depend on. Tyler would never understand that. The drive back to Uncle Hank's was slow, as I spent most of the time fighting to keep my emotions in check. By the time I reached home, my anger had turned into something colder, heavier. I found Uncle Hank working on his motorcycle in the garage, the smell of oil and grease thick in the air. "You look like you're ready to kill someone," he said, not even looking up, his wrench clinking against the engine. "Tyler stole my truck," I said, my voice tight. "He made a spare key and took it without asking." That got his attention. Hank straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "What? He trashed it too?" he asked. "Mud everywhere. Food, garbage, cigarette smoke. I don't even know how I'm going to clean it." Hank's jaw tightened, and I could see he was holding back his initial reaction. "Did you call the cops?" he asked. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "I wanted to, but it's my brother. You know, I didn't want to go that far." Hank sighed, tossing the rag onto his workbench. "Nathan, listen to me. Tyler's never going to learn until someone forces him to. You give him an inch, and he'll take everything you've got. That truck is your lifeline. Next time, don't call him. Call the police." I nodded, even though it felt like a betrayal to say it aloud. Calling the cops on my own brother? I couldn't imagine how my parents would react. Then again, they never forgave me for anything I did. So maybe it wouldn't make a difference. "You need to protect yourself," Hank said firmly. "No one else is going to do it for you." He offered to help me install a GPS tracker on the truck the next morning, just in case. "If he pulls something like this again, you'll know exactly where the truck is." That night, I spent 2 hours cleaning the truck, scrubbing the stains and spraying air freshener until my arms ached. It still smelled faintly like smoke, and there were clumps of mud I couldn't reach under the pedals. The whole experience left me simmering with frustration. I had worked so hard to build my own life, my own space, only for Tyler to stroll in and wreck it like it was his right. I didn't know it at the time, but that was only the beginning. The second theft. For the next few weeks, things were quiet. Tyler avoided me, probably because he didn't want to hear me lecture him again, and my parents gave me the silent treatment. They were good at that, acting like I was the villain for not letting their golden child get away with everything. I didn't care. I had my truck back. I was working more shifts at the hardware store, and for once, it felt like my life was my own. Then Christmas came. Every year, my family gathered at my parents' house for Christmas dinner. It wasn't that I looked forward to the holiday. I didn't. But I still went. Not for my parents or Tyler, but for Uncle Hank and my cousins, who were the only people I actually wanted to see. And honestly, I went for the food. I showed up late in the afternoon, parking my truck neatly at the end of the driveway where I could keep an eye on it. The moment I walked through the front door, Mom greeted me with her usual passive-aggressive flair. "Oh, Nathan," she said, her smile stretched too thin to be genuine. "I wasn't sure you'd come after all the drama you caused this month." I ignored her, shrugged off my coat, and headed straight for the kitchen, where Uncle Hank was already camped out with a mug of coffee. "Merry Christmas, kid," he said, giving me a firm pat on the shoulder. "Ignore your mother. You know how she is." "I'm used to it," I said, grabbing a cookie off the counter. The day dragged on like every other family gathering, chaotic, loud, and suffocating. Mom kept making digs at me whenever she thought no one was listening. "Nathan's gotten so protective of that truck," she said to one of my cousins. "It's like he thinks it's worth $1 million." I clenched my jaw, but stayed quiet. No point in starting a fight. Meanwhile, Tyler sat in the corner, glued to his phone, barely speaking to anyone. I figured he was sulking because I had shut him down so hard last time we talked. That suited me just fine. By the time evening rolled around, I was more than ready to leave. But then I noticed something. My truck keys, always clipped to my belt loop, were missing. I froze. At first, I thought maybe they had fallen off somewhere, so I retraced my steps, through the living room, the kitchen, even the bathroom. Nothing. My stomach dropped, and I bolted for the front door. I looked out the window, and the driveway was empty. My truck was gone. I felt like the ground had vanished beneath my feet. I yanked my phone out of my pocket and opened the GPS tracker app. Sure enough, the dot. The truck, now miles away and speeding, was already out of reach. I didn't need to think twice. I called Tyler. He picked up on the third ring, sounding way too casual. "Relax, bro. I'm just picking up a friend," he said, as though it was no big deal. "You stole my truck," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "Where are you?" "I'll bring it back," Tyler replied, brushing me off. "It's not like you need it right now. Chill out, Nathan, it's Christmas." I was done. I didn't care if it was Christmas or what my parents would think. I ended the call, grabbed Uncle Hank, and stormed out of the house. "Tyler took my truck," I said as we got into Hank's car. "I've got his location on the tracker." Hank didn't say anything, but I saw his jaw tighten as he pulled onto the road. I stared at the GPS on my phone, watching the dots slow down and stop near an exit ramp off the highway. That's when I saw it. My truck, stuck in a snowbank on the side of the road. The front bumper was crushed, the left headlight broken, and the grille looked like it had been hit with a sledgehammer. Tyler was standing off to the side, arms crossed, like this was just some small inconvenience. "It's not that bad," he said defensively as I got out of the car. "The roads were icy." "It's not my fault," I growled through clenched teeth. "What the hell were you thinking?" Before Tyler could answer, a police cruiser pulled up behind us, lights flashing. My stomach dropped. It was about to get much worse. The cruiser rolled up slowly, its lights cutting through the snowy darkness. For a brief moment, all I could hear was the hum of the engine and the crunch of boots on frozen gravel as the officer got out. Tyler shifted nervously next to the wrecked truck, his earlier smugness replaced by an awkward attempt to seem innocent. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, glancing between the Silverado and the two of us. His voice was calm but firm. I didn't even let Tyler speak. "He stole my truck," I said sharply and steadily. I have the GPS logs to prove it. He didn't have permission to drive it, and he crashed it. The officer looked at Tyler, his expression unreadable. Is that true? Tyler hesitated just a bit too long, his face turning red. I mean, I borrowed it. It's my brother's truck. It's not like he was using it. The officer's eyebrow shot up. Did you have permission to take it? Tyler hesitated again, just a second too long. Well, not exactly. That's called theft, the officer interrupted flatly. And you crashed it. The roads were icy, Tyler said, throwing his hands up in frustration. It's not like I meant to. Before I could say anything else, Uncle Hank stepped in. He had been standing a few feet back, arms crossed, silent until now. Officer, you might want to give him a breathalyzer, Hank said calmly, his voice cool. Something tells me he hasn't been driving sober. I saw Tyler's eyes dart toward the officer for just a split second, and I knew Hank had nailed it. The officer frowned, nodding. All right, son, let's check that out, he said. Tyler muttered something under his breath as the officer led him over to the cruiser. I watched as they went through the motions, the breathalyzer test, Tyler's stumbling excuses, and the officer's face hardening when the results came in. All right, that's it, the officer said, grabbing his cuffs. You're under arrest for driving under the influence and operating on a suspended license. I watched Tyler's face fall, his bravado wiped away. Wait, this is a mistake, he said, trying to backpedal. The officer didn't care. He cuffed Tyler and started guiding him toward the car. Tyler started yelling, Mom and Dad are going to kill you for this, Nathan. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. A few minutes later, my parents' van screeched to a halt behind the cruiser. My mom practically fell out of the passenger seat, her coat flying open in the freezing wind as she ran toward us. My dad followed, moving slower but just as frantic. What's going on here? My mom demanded, her voice shrill. She spotted Tyler being loaded into the back of the cruiser and turned to me with fire in her eyes. What did you do? What did I do? I shot back, incredulous. Tyler stole my truck. He wrecked it. He's been drinking. He did this to himself. The officer stepped in before she could scream at me. Ma'am, your son was caught driving under the influence on a suspended license. He crashed the vehicle. This isn't something we can overlook. My mom looked like she might faint. This is all a misunderstanding, she said quickly, her voice shaky. Tyler's a good kid. He just made a mistake. Uncle Hank snorted behind me. How many times have we heard that one? He muttered. She turned on him next. Hank, you're not helping. This is family business. We don't need the police involved. It stopped being family business when Tyler stole a vehicle and endangered lives, Hank replied coolly. My dad finally spoke up, stepping between them like a referee. Let's all calm down, he said, his voice forcedly calm in a way that only made me angrier. Tyler made a mistake, but we'll sort this out. You're not sorting anything out, I said, my voice rising. He stole from me. He trashed my truck. He's getting exactly what he deserves. You didn't have to call the police, Nathan, my mom shouted, tears welling up in her eyes. He's your brother. I didn't call the cops, I snapped. The GPS tracker led me here. Someone else called it in, I said, pointing at the flashing cruiser. But I should have called them the first time he took it. Before things could spiral any further, the officer cut in. Ma'am, sir, he said to my parents, we're taking him to the station. You can sort out bail later. As the cruiser pulled away, Tyler glared at me through the window. My mom's shoulders sagged as she turned to me with an expression I'll never forget. A twisted mixture of anger and disappointment. How could you let this happen to your brother? She asked. I laughed bitterly. You're kidding, right? He stole my truck. He did this to himself. My dad. He shook his head as though I was the one being unreasonable. You could have handled this privately, Nathan. You didn't need to make a scene, he said. Handled it privately? I repeated, almost laughing. You mean let him get away with it again? No, not this time. Hank placed a hand on my shoulder, stepping between me and my parents. Let's go, Nathan. You don't have to stand here and explain yourself. We turned and headed back to Hank's car, and I didn't look back at my parents. The aftermath began the next day. My mom called me before I had even woken up, leaving a voicemail filled with tears and guilt. Nathan, you have to fix this. Tyler's been through enough. How could you let him sit in jail? I didn't respond. I didn't care. Uncle Hank, on the other hand, seemed almost proud of me when I told him about the voicemail. Good, he said simply. Maybe this will finally show Tyler that actions have consequences. That afternoon, I got another call, this time from Tyler himself. Somehow, he had managed to get his hands on a phone from the county jail. I let it ring a few times before picking up, mostly because I wanted to hear what he had to say. Nathan, he said, his voice trembling just enough to sound pitiful. Look, man, I'm sorry, all right? I screwed up. I just need you to bail me out. I rolled my eyes. No. Come on, man, please, he begged. I can't stay in here. Maybe you should have thought about that before you stole my truck, I said coldly. Nathan, I'm your brother, he shouted, his voice cracking. You can't leave me here. I hung up without saying another word. A few minutes later, my mom called again. I picked up this time just to see how far she'd go. Nathan, she started, her tone wavering between anger and desperation. Your brother needs you. He's in a terrible place right now. We don't have the money to bail him out. Then let him sit there, I said, cutting her off. He stole my truck. He wrecked it. He got himself arrested. That's on him, not me. You're breaking this family apart, she said, her voice rising. No, Mom, I replied, my voice calm but firm. Tyler did that. You let him do it over and over again, and I'm done cleaning up his messes. I hung up and blocked her number. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The silence in the days that followed was almost eerie. My phone sat on my nightstand, quiet for the first time in what felt like years. I kept it that way, ignoring any unknown numbers, knowing exactly who it was, my mom, my dad, and probably even Tyler, desperate to pull me back into the mess I'd spent my whole life trying to escape. But I was done. For years, I had played their game. I let them guilt me into forgiving Tyler's endless mistakes, and brushed off every insult they threw my way when I stood up for myself. Not anymore. The moment I blocked their numbers, I felt lighter, like I had cut off a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Still, the fallout didn't take long. A week after Tyler's arrest, I was in Uncle Hank's garage, helping him replace the spark plugs in his motorcycle. The soft hum of the radio filled the space as Hank wiped grease from his hands and tossed me a wrench. You hear anything from your folks yet? Hank asked, though he probably already knew the answer. Nope, I replied, crouched beside the bike. I blocked their numbers after Mom tried one last guilt trip about how I'm destroying the family. Hank snorted. Typical Linda, always blaming someone else. He paused, shaking his head. Good on you, kid. They're going to try to pull you back in, though. You sure you're ready to hold that line? I'm sure, I said without hesitation. Hank didn't say much more. He just gave me a nod and went back to work. That was one of the things I appreciated about Uncle Hank. He never pushed me. He gave advice when I needed it, but he let me make my own choices. Later that evening, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't the casual knock of a neighbor dropping off cookies. It was a loud, impatient thud that made my stomach tighten. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Standing there in the freezing cold were my parents. My mom, her coat wrapped tightly around her, eyes sharp, and my dad, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Nathan," my mom started, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms and leaned against the door frame. "There's nothing to talk about." "Don't do this," she snapped, her voice shaking. "Your brother is struggling right now, and you're making it worse. This is not how family treats each other." "How family treats each other," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You want to talk to me about family after all these years? After everything Tyler's done to me?" "He's your brother," she said, her voice softening, as if she thought she could change my mind with pity. "You're supposed to support him." "I've supported him my entire life," I shot back. "I've watched you cover for him over and over again, no matter how badly he screws up, and every single time, I'm the one who gets blamed when I don't fall in line." "That's not fair, Nathan," my dad cut in. "You're making this into something bigger than it is. Tyler made mistakes, but we're trying to help him get back on his feet. You should be doing the same." "No," I said firmly. "That's where you're wrong. Tyler didn't just make mistakes. He stole from me. He destroyed the one thing I've worked hard for. And he's never been held accountable for anything because you two refused to let him face the consequences." My mom threw her hands up in frustration. "You're being unreasonable. Do you think you're perfect, Nathan? You've made mistakes too." "Maybe I have," I said, my voice low. "But I've owned up to every one of them. I've worked for everything I have. And I didn't expect anyone to bail me out when I messed up. Tyler's a grown man, Mom. He needs to figure this out on his own. And I'm not going to be part of your endless cycle of excuses." "You don't understand what it's like to be a parent," she said, her voice trembling now. "You don't know how hard it is to see your child in trouble. You'd do the same thing if it were your kid." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I wouldn't, because I'd raise my kid to take responsibility for their actions. I wouldn't let them walk all over everyone else." My dad took a step forward, his voice softer now. "Nathan, we're not asking for much. Just let Tyler stay with you for a while. He's got no job, no car, and nowhere else to go." I almost laughed at how absurd it was. "Are you serious? After everything he's done, you think I'm going to let him into my home? Let him trash my life the way he's trashed his own?" "It's not like that," my mom pleaded. "He just needs a little help to get back on his feet." "No," I said for the last time. "You want to keep enabling him? Go ahead. But I'm done. You've made it perfectly clear that Tyler will always come first. I don't owe you or him anything." They stood there, speechless. For once, my mom's face crumpled, like she wanted to cry, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. My dad just looked tired, as if this whole situation was somehow my fault. Without another word, I stepped back inside and closed the door in their faces. For a long time, I just stood there in the silence, my heart pounding. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty either. I just felt done. The next morning, I woke up to a long voicemail from my mom. I didn't even listen to it before deleting it. Then came texts, angry ones, desperate ones, some trying to guilt me into changing my mind. I ignored every single one of them. Meanwhile, Tyler stayed in jail a while longer. My parents eventually scraped together enough money to bail him out, borrowing from family and dipping into their retirement fund. When I heard about it through Uncle Hank, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Tyler went straight to their house after being released, sulking like a teenager. I stopped by once to grab a box of old tools from the garage. When I walked through the living room, he didn't even look up from the couch. He just sat there, staring at the floor, muttering about how unfair everything was. I didn't say a word to him. There was nothing left to say. Over the next few months, Tyler's life continued to spiral. He couldn't get his license back because he couldn't afford the fines, and he struggled to keep a job. My parents gave him everything they could: money, excuses, second chances. But it was never enough. One afternoon, Uncle Hank and I were sitting on the back porch drinking coffee when we saw Tyler pull up in my parents' old minivan. He was working as a pizza delivery driver now, and the look on his face when he spotted us was priceless. Hank gave him a little wave and said, "Good to see you working, Tyler." "Keep it up." Tyler mumbled something and practically ran back to the van. I couldn't help but laugh. For the first time in his life, he was being humbled. But no matter how far he fell, my parents still refused to see him for who he was. They still called me sometimes, leaving messages that I deleted without listening. My mom's voice, always so familiar, felt like an echo of something I'd left behind. "Nathan, you're breaking this family apart." No, I thought. I'm finally putting myself back together.